Hi, everyone. I see people filtering into the room. Hi, Lily. Hi, Michaela. Hi, Zara. It's very nice to see you all. We had about 25 people or so registered. There was a lot of interest in today's webinar. Nadia and I have known each other for about 2 years or so, and she's one of the sort of the rising stars in the world of entertainment law. And, the world is constantly in flux. When we planned this webinar just 2 weeks ago, who would have guessed that there would be a war in Israel, an end to the WGA strikes, and if you look at the
and failed, negotiation with SAG as of this morning.
As of this morning, I was just looking at some of the trades: Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, all top of the webpage. SAG-AFTRA talks suspended. What does that mean? I consider myself sort of entertainment adjacent. I work with a lot of artists and entertainers on their immigration, a lot of foreign talent who have studied in the U.S. and then want to get work authorized and perhaps become permanent residents and then eventually citizens. So I work with a lot of artists and entertainers, and even, having done this for 15 years, I still get a little confused about what the unions are. What does that mean? And so I've known Nadia for a while now, and she's an expert on these things. So I thought I would ask some basic questions of her that she will just hit out of the park that I don't know the answers to. Hi, Derek. It's nice to see you. Hi, Lily. So we're going to have like maybe 10, 15 minutes to talk about how unions work in the entertainment industry in the US and what that means for non-US talent, producers, directors, filmmakers, actors seeking to work in the US, how non-union work works. And then Nadia, if you have any questions for me about how the immigration system works, you don't practice immigration law. We work together sort of with a little bit of overlap. And then, of course, I think the best part of these webinars are the questions. We get fantastic questions. We've got people from literally all over the world in so many different time zones joining us today. I saw from the United Kingdom, from Mexico City, New York City, Los Angeles. So we've got a lot of people joining us. And your questions are always much more interesting than anything I can say. Nadia, of course, always has very interesting things to say. But
you're being too flattering today, Joe. Thank you. I do appreciate it. But
just drop your questions into the Q&A, and Nadia and I will do our best to answer everyone's questions. If we don't know the answer to something, we could do some follow-up. And then, of course, at the end of this session, there'll be a recording, and I'll distribute that to everyone who registered. So even if you can't attend the whole session, which should maybe last a little under an hour, I'll send a recording so you can review it later. So Nadia, when I read the headlines, SAG-AFTRA and AMPTP talks breakdown, who are these groups and what do they do in Hollywood?
So these are all very good questions. So let's start with what AMPTP is. AMPTP, a mouthful, is an acronym, right? It stands for Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. It's a trade association that is right here in Los Angeles in Sherman Oaks area. It represents over 350 American television and film production companies. And in bargaining and negotiations, what does that mean? With all the trade unions and all the guilds, right? So every time these companies want to deal with labor, and our entertainment industry is unionized, which is a good thing in light of the power that the studios yield. And as you know, Joe, I started my career as a talent lawyer in the entertainment business. So they have joined one association that represents all of them as vis-a-vis the unions. And it's the entertainment industry's official collective bargaining representative.
So they
That's
represent like the studio bosses, the Bob Iger,
exactly.
the Warner Brothers. They represent the people who own the studios and employ the talent, right?
That's right. And they negotiate over 80 industry-wide collective bargaining agreements.
Okay.
Uh,
And so what's a collective bargaining agreement? That's
so
a term that I haven't heard since law school. So what is that?
Okay. So let me just finish the thought.
Yeah.
And then they negotiate those on behalf of 350 motion picture and television producers. All right, so let's talk about what that is. Those are basically the union agreements, right? If you are part of a union, if I am an actress, I'm Angelina Jolie, and I belong to SAG, and then if somebody wants to hire me, they have to abide by all the rules that the union imposes. And let's get into that. So for somebody of, say, Angelina Jolie's caliber, she can get most of anything that she asks for, depending on the budget of the project and what the project is. But these agreements are vital for everyone else. They establish minimum rules of what you can and what you can't do. And historically, the actors, let's talk about actors, for instance, they were employed by the studios, right? And they work for the studios, and the studios, they couldn't go and work anywhere else, right? In the beginning. And then the system has now changed. They're an individual who can work anywhere they want, but then they're part of these unions because a lot of the members need these unions to be able to set minimum rates. Basic agreement basically, no pun intended, sets the minimum amounts of what they're supposed to get, and it goes by for different categories. Let's take TV, for example. If it's a TV show that is this many hours, you're supposed to get this fee, at least this fee, this kind of credit, this kind of residuals. And if it's TV, is film, motion picture, depending on the budget, you're supposed to get these minimums. And then it talks about your pension and health, the contribution that the studio has to make to the pension and health fund. It talks about what perks you are supposed to get, how many hours you're supposed to work, what breaks you're supposed to get. So it's really, really important that these people are protected because, as it's such a competitive business all around. People get really happy and excited that they have a deal, and sometimes they don't want to really advocate on their behalf. And the studios want to squeeze and reduce the budget that they have to put out for their content. So these agreements, these minimum agreements, which will be different for each different category, right, set the minimum amounts that a performer is supposed to get. Be it a writer, in the writer side, writers become a little bit more nuanced depending, we can get into that too if you're interested. But for SAG, and then also the DGA. The DGA is the same thing, you want to make sure that the directors compensated for the work they do. They get credit for directing a movie. They're not multiple directors, and some other rules that come into play for directors. So for each group of these unions, those rules, those minimum rules are there to protect what that particular role is, right?
So let me ask you, so my understanding, so if I'm an actor, I might join the Screen Actors Guild or SAG. If I'm a director, I might join the Directors Guild of America. If I am, say, a cinematographer or a grip or a crafty, I might join IATSE, International, I can't remember that acronym, IATSE. If I'm a producer, I might join the Producers Guild of America. And so those unions negotiate with the AMPTP to set minimum working standards, right? How many rest breaks, how many meal breaks, how's your salary computed? It's not.
Pension and health.
Say that again.
Pension and health.
Pension and health. But if I'm a cinematographer from India or England, must I join one of these unions in
So
order
this
to
is
work
a
in Hollywood?
really, really, really good question. So let's say you're an American. Don't even go that far, right? So how do you become part of the union, right? You could be an American cinematographer. Can you be part of the union? Right? Or an American writer. You have to have a minimum set of work that you've done, and each union has different requirements, and then you can become a part of it. Now, if a show, there's a project, right, that has some members, like let's take SAG, and they're hiring some actors that are part of SAG and some actors who are not part of SAG, then the whole production has to become a SAG signatory. What does that mean? That means that they have to abide by the rules of the union if they want to hire union members. And then all the other people who are not SAG members, the production will make them a member of the SAG union. So
Just for the term of the
American
show.
or on not American. One more time.
So in order to work as an actor, say, or a writer in the United States, you don't have to be a member of the union. But if the program that you're hired for has union members, then everyone
They'll
has
do it for you. They'll do it for you.
they'll do it for you. So sometimes you hear about, union versus non-union shows. What's that all about?
So now this question of union is a little tricky because if you're say let's just finish that thought for a minute. If you're an actor, the chances that there are multiple actors on a show is great, right? So if I have one actor that is a guild member, I'm probably going to have other actors who are guild members too. So I will have to make everybody guild member. But if it's a director, and I hire someone from a foreign country and that person is not DGA, doesn't necessarily mean that I have to become a DGA signatory, a Directors Guild signatory, because there's only one director, right? So it doesn't play the same way with all the guilds. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now, the next question is?
Well, my question is, I've seen it where there are some shows that are union shows, some
so
shows that are non-union shows. How do you know what the difference is? And if, say, I'm an actor who is a member of SAG-AFTRA, can I work on a non-union show, or am I prohibited from working on a non-union show?
Very good show. Very good question. So sometimes, especially with the independents, they do non-union projects, because if they do union projects, it becomes really expensive, right? All of a sudden your cost goes up, especially after COVID. There's so many requirements for COVID. And so a lot of shows will make their project non-union. Now, union members are prohibited, as you mentioned just now. They're prohibited from working on projects that are not union. If you're a member of a union, then you can't break union lines and then go work on a project that is not union, right? You're not really doing your union service or your self-service. Makes complete sense, right? So then at that point, those projects will hire people who are non-union. And sometimes you see people who are members of unions, they might participate, or the project could be non-union with the writers guild because the writer is not union, but it could be a SAG signatory because the actors are SAG, or one of them is, and then they have to make the whole show.
Oh, interesting. I never realized that the individual sort of guild would, so the actors might be a union show for the purposes of the actors, but say the lighting director, the cinematographer, the grips, those all might be freelance who are not, say, IATSE members.
Right. Or you could have the writer be guild, the actors be guild, below the line be guild, but then the director is not guild. But usually people who are really experienced and have been around the business for a while, they wind up being part of the guild, right? So if you want to use those people who are experienced and kind of maybe down at a different stage of their career, you're going to have to become a signatory, because you won't be able to hire those folks if you're not a signatory, right? So yeah.
So I see some people have joined us. Harsh, Alessandro, thanks for joining us. Harsh, the question that I have is if I am, say, an accomplished director who has built my credits, say in Mexico, and now I'm thinking of relocating to the United States. Do I want to join the Directors Guild, or what's the calculus that about joining the Directors Guild or SAG-AFTRA or the WGA or any of the other unions? Why would I want to? Why would I not want to?
So that's a really good question. One that I get often. Sometimes it's just an analysis between you and your representatives. Sometimes you don't want to become a member of a union because it'll be harder for you to be hired. Now, if you're working with a studio or with Netflix, for example, or streamer, and you're one of their go-to directors or go-to writers or go-to, actors who gets hired on their shows, then you are becoming I mean, that goes without saying, you're going to become, part of your guild. However, if you're not and you're coming over and you want to start your career, you don't want to make it expensive for people to hire you, right? So at that point in your career, it's a different calculus, it's a different analysis depending on where you are. If I have a client or you have your client and you come to me and Nadia and you say, but then sometimes chances are that if that actor is successful in their home country, or that director or that writer, that they have become part of the unions and the guilds already anyway, because they were hired on some production that was being filmed overseas. Or for example, while the strike with WGA was going on, I'll give you a real life example. I have a client who who does a lot of movies and TV shows, and we were working on a TV series, and he didn't want to hire anybody American. He didn't want to break the rules, so he wanted to go to UK and hire a writer. Guess what? That writer was already part of the WGA because he had worked on other projects that were created by Americans, and he had already been part of WGA. So, your citizenship doesn't always matter. But to answer your specific question, you probably want to hold off for a little bit.
That kind of relates to a question that we have from Michaela. Michaela asks, what if the show is shot in Canada? For example, a show in Vancouver under the UBCA ACTRA with lead actors under SAG. If a Vancouver actor books a role under that show under the UBCA, I think that means the Canadian Actors Association, right? I'm not even familiar with that organization. Would it be a SAG signatory? If they move to the US, would that credit transfer to SAG? That is a good Nadia question. That is not a good Joe question.
So yeah, but then you have to make sure that you abide by all the other credit requirements too, right? So and then work on a certain number of projects that are American based, and and you kind of study what the rules are, and we can get offline and get into the details of that, the nuanced details, and then but you may not want to become a member, like I said, it's not always a good idea when you're starting out, especially like for actors. Even for actors, in the beginning, you really just want to get your face out there. You want to be hired, you want to do work, you want to, I was on another panel with financiers and producers at a film festival in LA in the summer, and everybody, name of the game is do as many projects as possible, get it out there, right? Get your work out there, let people know what you do. And sometimes if you do become a union member, it's harder for people to hire you, where if you're really good at what you do, then it gives you a leg up in that now the producer thinks, oh, I can get the same quality but not pay as much. Let me, and then that project might hit it out of the park. And then at that point, you want to go become a union member, right?
Once a person becomes a union member and they have to work only on union shows, can they ever give that up? Or is that for life? It's for life. Yeah. So the trade-off, it sounds to me like the trade-off is if you become a guild member, you probably are going to be paid better. You're going to have pensions, retirements, residuals, and but the converse of that is that you might not work as much because it's more expensive to hire union members.
Right. And it depends on where you are in your career.
Yeah.
Right.
And then aren't there whole areas of the arts and entertainment industry where there is no union? I'm thinking models, I'm thinking live musicians, I'm thinking say like Instagram influencers, webcasters. There's whole areas that are non-union, right?
Yes, but then that influencer could be an actress and could already be part of SAG, or
Right.
they could be musicians and they can be part of their guild, right? There's so many different, there are over 80 different guilds and unions in the.
I want to ask you one quick question, and then Hannah has her hand raised, so I'll turn it over to her. But I want to ask. So 5-6 months ago, the writers went on strike, and then a few weeks later, the actors went on strike, and then a few weeks ago, the writers were able to resolve their issues. And as we said at the top of the hour, the headline in all the trades today is that the talks with the actors have broken down. So why do the writers go on strike, what they get, and what's holding up the actors? So I said it was a quick question, but it may not be.
The question I had, I spent the whole morning trying to figure that out. Yeah. So what is the difference? It's in the demands. In fact, here, let me look at my notes so I don't misquote. The difference is in the way that they are, it's with the compensation is about money. The main block to the deal is SAG's desire for revenue sharing from shows that are streaming, and how they want the profit to be split, which is about 2% of potential profits. And then the CEOs and the studios are saying that is an economic burden that they can't handle. And they say that this proposal will cost them over 2.4 billion over the course of 3 years, or more than 800 million per year, right?
So the new deal is it's a 3-year deal, right? So are we going to be back where we were in 2026?
Hopefully not.
We'll see.
No, hopefully not. And you know that the last time the WGA and SAG went on strike together, can you think when it may have been? Can you guess?
I read that in the news. It was before you or I were born.
1960.
Yeah. So it's been a long time, and so it was a rare event, but who knows? The whole United States right now seems to be having a labor renaissance with, you know, the healthcare workers at Kaiser, and the auto workers with the United Auto Workers in Detroit and elsewhere. So it seems like, you know, the labor movement, which has gone through ebbs and flows over the years, really is maybe ascending. You know, the president himself went to the auto workers and was on the picket line with the auto workers. First time that a sitting U.S. president has ever done that in our history. So we're kind of in this period right now where the auto workers, the writers, the actors, all these unionized people, and then I think also in the greater sense, you know, Amazon workers, Starbucks
restaurant workers, restaurant workers. You
know, we're experiencing a real renaissance of labor activism in the United States right now for a variety of reasons that academics will get into. But from a practical perspective, like, what does this mean for Hollywood? Does that mean that you think more production is going to go overseas, or do you think that means that production is going to stay in the United States, or any way to know?
So I'm going to answer your question, but let's talk about this. Why is this all happening, right? We are in a kind of having another technological revolution, right? And you can guess what that is. AI, right? And we in the entertainment business, in the world of IP, are at the forefront of it. What happens with us will affect everybody. And what do I mean by that? That's not a hyperbole, because is an existential issue with what can you copyright, who can create copyright, who can create the copyright that is owned? Is a machine the same as a human? These are fundamental questions that affect everybody, right? Will affect the auto workers, the healthcare workers. Now an AI is almost as capable as a radiologist reading a lab report, or an AI was able to pass the medical exam. I mean, are we going to be seen by AI? What's the role of government? Are we going to have laws, ethical? What are the ethical ramifications, right? So this is a big issue. And then on the other hand, we have inflation and rising costs of living because of what happened with COVID and all the other issues that is beyond the scope of this conversation, right? So it's affecting everybody down the line. So while it seems that what's happening is really limited to Hollywood, it's really not. It's a big issue, right? It will at some point probably even affect my job and your job, Joe, right?
I'll tell you, Nadia, as an experiment, I had a case last week where we had filed the case. The government comes back with a request for evidence. In this particular case, we had a non-union member, a Chinese national, who was applying for an O1 category visa. He had a very significant track record of accolades and awards in China and while as a student here in the U.S. He had 6 different projects lined up over the next 3 years, and we described those 6 separate projects. The Immigration Service came back to us and said, very naively, you'll get a kick out of this, said, how can a cinematographer have 6 different projects going on at the same time? That doesn't make sense. Please explain how this person can work like that. And, as you know, a high profile, high achiever talent will have multiple projects going on in different stages at various times. As part of our response to the Immigration Service, I found I did the traditional argument of finding news articles and opinion pieces and things like that. But I actually asked ChatGPT, is it a common practice for television editors or cinematographers to have multiple projects? And sure enough, ChatGPT had the right answer. And so I just screenshot that and included it as part of our response. Now, I didn't have ChatGPT write the response. I just basically said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Immigration Officer, even ChatGPT gets this right. Why didn't you do your homework? But we were successful in that case, and it was approved. And so already AI is having an effect on my practice, and I think it's going to be affecting many people. Your world is a lot in the world of contract drafting, using the right language in negotiations, and I know just being a person out in the community that's affecting a lot of people. So it is a brave new world, and I think if anyone says they know how it's going to play out, they're naive.
Yeah, it's kind of like what happened with the internet and how the music business collapsed with streaming, right? And then we into it kind of bled into entertainment and TV and film, and then we have all these streamers, hence these strikes, right? And we have artificial intelligence, and how is that going to affect all of us, right? So yeah, this is a kind of a more involved question, and I think what the unions are doing, it's kind of defining the new frontier and forcing laws to be made. For example, the copyright laws, the copyright board had to come down and make a decision on whether something created by AI can be copyrighted or not. And there was a similar situation where a monkey had pushed a camera and taken a photo. I'm sure you heard about that.
I know about them. Yeah, the monkey took the camera and it took the photo. Who owns the photo? So the monkey and the AI are sort of similar in that.
Because it's not human. It's not human.
We've got it. Just to catch people up, because I know that some people have joined us in the last few minutes. So Nadia and I are talking about the state of unions, the state of Hollywood, and with an eye towards foreign talent, non-U.S. based talent coming to the U.S. answering some questions about how the unions work, because of course it's been in the news. For anyone who's joined late, rest assured there's a recording. I'll distribute the recording so you can review it at your leisure after we hang up. We've got a question from Alessandro. Let me read it out, and I think this is one for both of us, really. How are the current strikes ending, the ending of the strikes, affecting the influx of projects you're seeing? Is there room for new indie projects after the backlog? And how can these projects best position themselves to get out there in this current environment?
Amazing question. Let me turn it around to you for a minute. How have the strikes affected immigration?
I had a number of people basically say, I'm going to hold off right now and see how long this is, because a lot of people were very concerned that the strikes would go maybe into next year even. You know, there was that terrible, you know, not very empathetic quote from, I think, Bob Iger, where he said, you know, people are going to start losing their apartments and not able to pay their bills, and then the holidays are going to hit us. You know, the end of the year holidays are going to hit us, and so the worry was that, you know, the studio bosses, they're the bank, they're the ones who write the checks. So you know, so for a lot of actors, writers, producers, you know, who are not Angelina Jolie, who are just trying to make ends meet and pay their kids college tuition and pay their rent, you know, it can be very challenging. So I did see some people say, I'm going to hold off. I've had a lot of questions about it, of course. One of the questions that comes up a lot to me is, must I join a union? You know, and then and you may not know this, but there is this very strange provision related to O1 visas that says if there is a union that covers what the person is supposed to do in the case, we have to go out and solicit the opinion of the union and also the opinion of AMPTP. So actors, writers, producers, directors, we have to go to the relevant union, and we have to go to
AMPTP.
And yes, and
what's the reason for that?
Well, it's good. If you go into the legislative history, so the O visas were created in the early 1990s. And do you remember there was a very colorful figure passed away recently named Jack Valenti? Valenti was the sort of the boss of bosses. I think he was the one who created the rating systems, like why is a movie R-rated or PG-13 rated. Part of the negotiation to create the O visa in the early 1990s was, we're getting rid of what we call the labor certification. So the old system was you have to get a labor certification saying you're paying a minimum amount of money to the worker. That's still true for, say, the H-1B cases, where you have to attest, the employer has to pay a minimum amount of money to the U.S. worker, so
they can support themselves and stay here, basically.
Well, so it's not to undercut the U.S. jobs market. You know, if you could bring in you know, if the prevailing wage of, say, actors are, forget the union issues for a second, if, say, the prevailing wage of an actor is $30 an hour, and you can bring in people for under that, then you would, you know, then there'd be an incentive to bring in non-U.S. workers. That was the old H requirement that's still very much a part of H-1B law. When the O visa was created, they wanted to give more flexibility to creatives, entrepreneurs, people who had achieved a level of success abroad, who were seeking to build something in the US. So they got rid of the prevailing wage requirement. And as part of the political bargain to make that happen, Jack Valenti, the studio boss, said, well, if you're going to get rid of the union said, let me back up. The unions said, if you're going to get rid of the prevailing wage requirement, we want to review the case and make sure that nothing hanky's going on with, you know, bringing in talented workers. And then Valenti said, well, if SAG gets a voice, we AMPTP get a voice.
Oh, so interesting. This is actually the the public's policy behind it, I agree with. I kind of see why this would be, because you want to, also there are 2 points to this. We want to protect American workers, first of all. Sorry to anybody who's not an American on this, but we have to protect what's here. If we don't protect it for Americans, then other people can't benefit from it either. So it also actually benefits everybody. We set the precedent. Then the other issue is that entertainment world and the creative world is different. It's kind of a different world than everybody else, right? So that's why the special rules that you just mentioned versus the other kind of workers that would be coming, because you can't quantify it, right? You can't say an actor or a writer that is from, say, France, that voice, how can you compare that voice and say, I want an American writer? That's a completely different creation. It's the creative process, right? It's not like, not to trivialize what I do or what you do, although there are differences between who you go to and definitely different personalities, but it would be much easier to go to another lawyer, but than to a director, right? A famous, I think of Almodovar, right? A director like him, that is his kind of stuff or his kind of movie. So it makes sense that you would have these special rules. Now, to go back to a long-winded way of getting back to the question that was asked, it's interesting because I also represent a lot of producers and financiers, and the financiers just stopped financing anything while the strikes were going on, because when is it going to pick up? When is the project going to go on again, right? And when are we going to have when are we going to get a return on our money? Is it going to go till the end of the year? What if we start in we get going on the production even? And then the other question was, you remember about the waivers, the indies getting waivers with SAG?
Yeah, of course, yes.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So on the one hand, that was really great with the waivers, because now the indies could have access to talent that they wouldn't have before, right? Because why? Because now the actors can't work for the big studios. They're forbidden by their union to work for the big studios. But if you're an indie that has nothing to do with that chain, you could ask for a waiver and then get it. But then there's a catch, which was really interesting. A lot of people were coming out against people doing these indies that had the waivers. What the catch was that they would have to sign up for the request voluntarily. They would have to agree to all the changes that SAG was demanding of AMPTP, right? So they were voluntarily writing into it. And then SAG was saying, if all these indies are agreeing to it and it works for them, why are the studios saying that this, this system won't work for them? The
If it
economics
works for an indie, why doesn't it work for Warner Brothers, Sony,
right,
Netflix,
exactly,
Amazon Prime?
exactly. So yes, so we did see quite a number of independent projects going because they were getting the waivers. But then again, with foreigners coming over, or because a lot of times my clients are hiring foreign actors, foreign writers, foreign directors, right? And or even foreign production companies coming over and getting their visas to do projects here. That kind of all dried up because it's uncertainty. When you have uncertainty, business kind of stops, right? Even if you think you're going to get this kind of waiver or not, what if it takes SAG a long time, and then that's a big commitment, financial burden. Now, what happens with the backlog? Going back to the question again, the second part of the question, what happens with the backlog when it's all over? That's a really good question. You have all these shows that were stopped, right? All these seasons of different shows that were canceled because of the writers. not being able to work. So we're going to have a backlog. That is a really good observation. We're going to have a backlog. You can't help it, you know. Like for example, during COVID, even though there was COVID, there were all these restrictions, and the cost of making projects had gone up because of COVID, new COVID rules. You still had a lot of projects being made because people needed the content, right? And now, because of this backlog, we you know, as you well know, shows are made now for next year, right? So we're gonna have a period of time where there's nothing. So there's definitely going to be a backlog. And how do indies get into the game, and how can they get ahead of time? Ahead, that's a yeah, that's a difficult question. It really depends on the circumstances and how you have your project set up, right? So if you, the rule of thumb, I'll just say it, is that you want to have as big a name attached as possible for your project, you know, whatever it may be. Or
a question from Nike. Nike asks, should one apply for an O1 visa if they've just started out in their career and doesn't have a lot to show in their portfolio, but has PA, which I presume means personal assistant or production assistant, but has PA and grip experience in the industry in the US? So O1 visas are for persons of extraordinary ability or persons of extraordinary achievement. It's for people at the top of their game. It is a high and subjective bar. So when we apply for an O1 visa, the essential elements to show the government in the petition is that they worked in a leading or critical role for distinguished organizations, that there's good press about themselves or their projects, that they've won awards, either themselves or their projects, that they've been highly paid in comparison to others, and that they are held in high regard by recognized experts in the field. That's usually where letters of recommendation will come in. I'm paraphrasing the rules, the criteria themselves. You can look up online. Not very well written in my mind, but that's sort of my plain English interpretation of the rules. So when I meet with someone for the first time and I review their resume or CV, and if they've just started out, an O1 is probably not an appropriate next step for them if they're just starting out, if they've changed careers. Now, remember, it's about your entire career, not just your US credits. Most people who apply for O1 visas have never had US work authorization before. Alternatively, some people come to the US, say on student visas, then they get what's called an OPT, a work permit that follows the student visa. The length of the OPT tracks the length of the program. So someone who's in a master's program gets a longer OPT than someone who's in, say, a certificate program. And then strategically using the OPT to garner credits, press, high profile positions, et cetera, maybe with some of these indie projects attached to bigger names, that would be the way to start building and strategizing.
Don't become a member of any unions.
And for what it's worth, we talked about that union consultation requirement. There's no requirement that a person join the union in order to get the consultation. The unions issue the consultations regardless of someone's union membership, for what it's worth.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is something that clients ask me. I actually had this come up last week. Could these potential performers, if they are in that stage of their career, go to someone who would sponsor them? So let's say a manager, an agent, or a film project, or a TV project, or a musical video?
That's a good question, and one I get often. Okay, so the idea of sponsorship is not separate and apart from what we call the alphabet soup of immigration. So there are many different categories of visas. I've already mentioned a few: the H-1B, the TN visa for Canadians and Mexicans, the E-2 investor visa, the L-1 intra-company transfer visa, the O visa for high achievers. So regardless of who is your sponsor, and I'll talk about who that is in a moment, regardless of who your sponsor is, we still need to identify the category. So sometimes people will say, Joe, I'm frustrated. I don't have the credits for an O1, and I don't have any of these other elements for these other visa categories, but someone's willing to sponsor me, an employer's willing to sponsor me. That by itself isn't enough. Going back to that legislative history, the traditional notion of employment was the traditional notion of employment-based immigration. So traditional employment, factory workers, office workers, you'd have one employer at a time. The employer would always sponsor or petition for the worker. The vast majority of immigration is not self-petitioned. You have to have a U.S. company or a U.S. person sponsor or petition on your behalf. The rules for who can be a petitioner change depending on the category of visa. One of the innovations when the O visa was created is they separated out the concept of who the petitioner or sponsor is from who the actual employers are. So I describe it as O1s have different flavors. One flavor might be the traditional notion of NBC Universal wants to hire you to perform on their 30-minute network sitcom on Peacock, and they can be your petitioner or sponsor. By the way, the word petitioner and sponsor mean the same thing in this context. There's a lot of confusion about that. A different flavor of O1 visa is what we call the agent-sponsored petition. And again, confusion here, because when I say the word agent, I don't necessarily mean a CAA or a WME. I'm not referring to like a traditional entertainment agent. I'm referring to someone appointed by the foreign worker and the employers to file the case. So in the example that I had earlier with the Chinese national who had 6 different offers of employment lined up from 6 unrelated companies, we filed all that under a single petitioner, which is a U.S. company. And the rules are flexible so that it can be any U.S. company, any U.S. person, a citizen or green card holder, who agrees to file the case. So in the world of the O1 rules, there's no requirement, for instance, that the petitioner or sponsor pay the fee. There's no requirement. That's not true for, say, the H-1B, where the employer must pay the fees. In the world of O1 visas, the petitioner does not accept, liability should the foreign worker overstay or not pay his or her taxes or commit a crime or something like that. They're not on the hook for that. Sometimes people get that in their head when they hear the word sponsor. They think it's more involved than it actually is. So the petitioner or sponsor can be flexible in the world of O1 visas, but merely having a sponsor doesn't get us to a positive outcome. It's an element, but it's not the whole Megillah. Let's see. Michaela has a question. So if you do a 3 years master's program, would it be a 3-year OPT? I don't know the answer to that. You have to speak to the individual schools. The schools regulate. We have, for all the flaws of the U.S. immigration system, we do actually have a pretty good student visa system. We're really good at educating people and giving them work permits. But those details are school by school, program by program, and I don't know the answer to that. Derek says, could you please talk about the perm and working visa related to the industry for foreign workers, like EB1 perm O1 visas, what's the evaluation process, standards, and pass-through rates? Some real case examples would be appreciated. Okay, so that's a complicated question. Bear with me, and I'll break it down. Okay, so perm is a way that employers get what's called a labor certification so that eventually their foreign worker, can become a permanent resident of the United States. A permanent resident of the United States is also sometimes called a green card holder. The way to think about it is this: visas have end dates. There are fixed end dates on a visa. They're always temporary. Green cards are permanent residency in the United States. We sometimes call them LPRs, lawful permanent residents of the United States. If you have a green card, you are a lawful permanent resident. Those mean the same thing. When someone comes to me and they say, Joe, I want a green card, I usually turn that question around on them and I say, do you want to make the US your home on a permanent basis? Of course, you can take vacations. Of course, you can take work outside the US, but do you want to sort of make the US your home base? So that's usually the question about visas versus green cards. Now, you ask about EB-1. Okay. EB-1 means employment-based preference category 1. Okay, there are 5 employment-based categories to apply for permanent residency. A person can become a permanent resident through a family relationship like marriage or parentage. Family-based immigration is a huge subject, not quite in the scope of this conversation, but it's something that I do, and it's something that a lot of people think about. Family-based immigration. There is the diversity lottery, the green card lottery, which is actually open right now. The only thing I can tell you about that is watch out for scams. It doesn't cost anything to enter. And there are many people who are interested in the program, but are not eligible because their countries are overrepresented. So you have to work that out with the State Department, and it is random. There's nothing anyone can do to help you or hurt you. It's a lottery draw.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
What if you've started your application down another path? Could you still participate in the lottery?
Yeah, I get that question every year. Yeah, someone who is, say, in the process of applying for an O1 visa can still apply for the diversity lottery. It doesn't prohibit them. I have in my history probably 2 or 3 people, and they're always the hard-fought cases. They were never the easy cases that just get approved straight away. They were the hard-fought cases that we really had to push back on to the government, and then we find out a few months later, oh, she won the diversity lottery, but there's no way to count for,
No.
there's no way to account for that.
Never know.
There's people who enter every year and never get it 20 years later. And so green cards based on family, based on the diversity lottery, green cards based on humanitarian issues like asylum or refugee status, and then green cards based on employment-based green cards. 5 categories: EB-1, 2, 3, 4, 5. EB-5 is the big investor category. People either invest $900,000 or $1.8 million in a new or existing US business. There's lots of strings attached. Most of my entertainment people don't go for EB-5. EB-4 is for certain religious workers and translators who helped in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It was in the news about a year ago.
Very limited. It's very limited.
During the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. I've never filed an EB-4. EB-3s and EB-2s typically go through the PERM process. That's where the employer advertises the position in a reasonable manner at a market rate and is unable to find a qualified existing US worker. So I have this job, I advertise the job, there was no one qualified for the job. I file that with the Department of Labor. That's what's called the PERM process. Once the Department of Labor issues their labor certification, then the employer can file what's called an I-140 and start the immigration process for their worker. EB-1 is self-petitioned, and I file a lot of EB-1s every year. EB-1 is sort of the natural next step for people on O1 visas. So a typical, you want real examples? Okay. And I could talk about him because he's talked about this in the press, and we've actually done press interviews together. Emrys Cooper is a British actor from Dover, England. He was a dancer, model, actor. He's very fit. He's very buff. He always plays sort of the bad boy. Okay, so he moves from Dover to London. He works on stage. He works on television in the United Kingdom. He comes to the U.S. Because he had kind of reached the pinnacle of where he thought he could be in London, and he decides, there's only one Hollywood, and it's in Hollywood. It's not in London. So he hires a different lawyer. I hadn't met him yet. Hires a different lawyer to prepare an O1 visa case. That first O1 visa case was successful. He had shown that he had a high level of ability. The prior lawyer documented the upcoming work. He comes comes to the end of his 3-year term. He is denied a renewal. The officer said that because he was not being paid the same amount as Charlie Sheen, who was being paid $1.5 million per episode on 2.5 Men, this is going back obviously a decade plus, because he's not being paid $1.5 million per episode, then he must not be at the top of his game.
If you ever need me to consult on any of these cases, by all means.
We'll
I
work.
have like I can speak for an hour in response to that question.
It was absurd. It was an absurd denial. He reaches out to me. We refile the case. I think we sharpen the arguments, but the bottom line, the denial doesn't prejudice future cases, so we can just try again. We tried again. We were successful. We got him an O1 visa. I think we went for a third O1 visa, so the second one that I prepared. And then at some point he said, you know, I'm living and working in the US. This is working for me. I want to be able to take on work outside of the work of acting. I want to maybe produce films. I want to put down roots. I want to buy a house. He was in his late 20s, I think, at the time. He said, Joe, let's go for a green card. And so I counseled him to file an EB-1. Derek, just to clarify, there is no perm process with the EB-1. It's one of the big benefits that you don't have a traditional job offer with an EB-1. You don't have a perm process. EB-1 is self-petition. So Emrys, in this example, signed the case on his own behalf, not an employer, not a studio, not an O1 visa sponsor. So he signs it off. At that time, it was one of the biggest cases I'd ever filed. It's giant. I now keep, our cases are so voluminous, I keep like deep FedEx boxes ready to go for the massive files, because we have to really persuade these officers that this person has a very high level of ability. In Emrys's case, you know, a lot of his work was UK-based work, so I wouldn't presume that the officer knows what the BBC is. I wouldn't presume that they know what ITV is. We have to show that to the immigration officer. So we filed his EB-1. We were successful. We adjusted his status from the O1 into the green card. He had his green card for about 5.5 years, and then he became eligible to apply for his citizenship, and now he's a dual US-UK citizen. That is a somewhat typical trajectory for a person.
I have a question. How many times can you extend an O1 visa?
Good question. So an O1 visa can be issued for an initial 3-year period. The length of the visa depends on the length of the upcoming projects that we describe in the case, up to a 3-year maximum. Okay. And then
what if you're on a seasonal show, like say like 2.5 Men, and you're supposed to, they have consecutive options to hire you?
Yeah, that can sometimes get confusing with immigration officers. Sometimes immigration officers will say, you know, well, the first season option has been exercised, but we don't know if the second season option will be exercised. So we might cut this off. So that can get a little confusing and tricky. Try to avoid that.
Can I add something here?
Yeah.
Which brings me to the point where I keep hearing from the managers and agents that I work with that the studios prefer that the foreign performers that they hire have a green card.
That's right. That is a very good point. And let me give you the history there, because I was around for that. So, and this is a real example. This really happened. O1 visas have a very helpful provision in the regulations. It's a unique provision. There were a lot of political trade-offs when the O1 visa came into existence. We want the best and the brightest, but we need to give them something. We need to give them flexibility. So most employment-related immigrations you have your sponsoring employer. You can work for your sponsoring employer. If your job ends, if you're terminated, if the company goes bust, if you're laid off, typically the visa is over, and you have to figure out what your next steps are, or you have to depart. The O visa says that the petitioner, the sponsor, may add additional performances or engagements during the validity period of the visa, and we don't have to file what's called an amended petition. Most employers, Disney, Netflix, Paramount, take the position that as long as you're working in your field and you have an approved O1 visa, you can take on the new work. Okay, so what will happen is say I have CAA has sponsored the case and I have 3 different employers, employer A, B, C, listed in the petition. Now, say the petition's approved, the person's here on the O1 visa, they're doing the work for A, B, and C. Now Disney wants to hire them for their new Lucasfilm or their new Star Wars or their new Marvel project. Disney's position is that all you need is to verify that the O1 was in the field that they're being hired for. So that they're being hired, the petition was filed as an actor and that they're going to be working as an actor. And then what typically happens is, say Disney will have the petitioner sign off on a letter saying, we are fine with this additional performance or engagement. NBC Universal's lawyer has the opposite interpretation of the same regulation. NBC Universal says, if the employer was not named in the original petition, if it wasn't A, B, or C in this example, you can't take work outside of A, B, or C. So if NBC Universal wants to hire someone, they will have to file an amended petition or they won't hire the person. What happened in real life, Nadia, this is going back to 2011, NBC had hired someone who was a well-known rock musician to be a lead actor on a new sitcom. He had an approved O1 visa, but no one ever dug through the visa. So you know, as the people on this call know who have been through the process, when you get an O1 visa approved, it just says approved and it has the dates. And then when it's printed in your passport, it just says O1. It doesn't say O1, but only for acting, or O1, but only for these employers. It just says O1. Someone messed up at NBC Universal and they didn't check. And what happened was they were ready to start a 200-person major production where the lead actor is not qualified to do this work. And at the 11th hour, someone made that discovery. And so what happened is, as a result, many employers, conservative employers who have broadcast licenses, who are publicly traded, said, we just don't want to deal with this. We don't want to deal with this headache. We don't want to deal with this expense of hiring our own lawyers or outside lawyers to review these cases. We're just not dealing with people on O1 visas. We're only going to deal with people on green cards or people who are citizens, because it's really simple. You have a green card, regardless of how you got your green card, you can work in any field, just like a U.S. citizen can. You know, a person on a green card, the difference between a green card holder and a citizen, citizens can vote and serve on juries. That's basically the big, you know, broad difference. Green card holders can work in any field, they can take any job. So there's not an issue with immigration compliance. So that's what happened in real life 11, 12 years ago. But as you know, Nadia, there's a high turnover rate and people don't know why is the rule the way it is. It's just now there are just some places that they say no visas, no O1 visas, but there's always like an unspoken exception, because if they really like you, they'll make it happen, because I've been on those cases. So the bottom line,
Depends on how badly they want you.
Correct. Exactly. I had someone, a well-known person, who was originally brought over as a radio presenter, and then she was hired for an NBC show. She had never.
I wonder who that is.
You know who it is. She was hired on an NBC show. She had never worked as an actor. She's starring with major A-list people. They just really liked her. And you know, even though NBC said like no O1s on the breakdowns, on the castings, they really liked her, so they made it happen. You know, and now she's a green card holder. We filed her green card and we're successful. So she can take on any role, and she's gone on to great success. I'm so proud of her. She is in the Marvel universe, the Star Wars universe, and the Star Trek universe. She hits all my nerd buttons, and she's one of my all-stars.
Like I said, you know, the entertainment world, which is basically the creative world, is a whole different, you know, universe.
Yeah.
The rules are different than for everyone else because you're creating something, you know, how it's really, it just goes back to the same thing. You can monetize, you can to some degree, but you can really monetize the value of the creative process, be it a performer, a writer, a director, musician, with whatever field it may be, a cinematographer, a mixer, you know. So it's you know, it's kind of, it makes sense that the public policy supports that, um you know, that difference. Yeah.
We're just a little over the 1 hour mark. If there are any final questions, just please raise your hand or put it in the chat. But Nadia, I really want to thank you for your time. I didn't understand a lot of this about how the unions work and how they don't work. That thing about, well, the actor, it could be an actors union show, but it may not be a whole union show where like the directors and the crew. So I really appreciate your time and insight.
You know, in as a final note, this
Yeah.
actually happened to me. A very famous actress in a different country was referred to me to represent her. And it's interesting the breadth of disinformation that is given to people, right? And she was told that she should become a union member so she can get jobs. And as I just explained, a lot of times you don't want to. And if you need to become a union member, the project, the studio, the producers will do that for you. You don't need to do anything. In fact, if you don't have enough to be able to become a member, whatever the rules are, which I can look up off the top of my mind, is not really that high. The bar is not that high. You know, they can, what we call a Taft-Hartley, they can put you in for that project as a SAG member, and then you become a SAG member. But that's not something for people to worry about. Is the bottom line is becoming a member of a union to get jobs here, that shouldn't be something of concern.
Nadia, thank you for
non-Americans.
you demystified a lot of this and provided a lot of great insight. I'll send a recording of this discussion to everyone who registered, and I'll put Nadia's contact information in. If you have any questions for her or me offline, just feel free to reach out.
And if you have requests for future, you know, Q&As, discussions that you'd like us to have, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we love feedback. So if there are certain topics you want us to cover in future sessions, please feel free to reach out, and we will we'll do it. All right, Nadia, have a great morning. It's a little after 11 here on the West Coast. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.